has now turned into a single lane chaotic dilemma which can only be described as hoops of the devil. We are essentially just jumping those hoops in order to avoid meeting the devil. This is something that needs to be addressed on a very immediate scale. So, the high accident rates, especially attributed among two-wheelers, this is another aspect which is of Goa's traffic challenges. And this is something that I was discussing with Abed's team as well as with Nilanku. And that is, I will take a simple illustration which we have commonly seen on Discovery Channel on Animal Planet, but very relevant. Essentially, all of us human beings are wired to have primal instincts, and this is essentially due to the prefrontal cortex of our brain being wired to have instincts that are of survival, that are of and that are of chasing, and that are essentially meant to save us. Survival instincts that are essentially meant to save us in the wilderness. This is basically how we were, and we are now evolved. We are civilized animals. But just try to recollect the first time you saw a big cat, such as a leopard or a cheetah or a jaguar, trying to chase after its prey, and the prey would essentially be oryx or a deer or a wildebeest. The first thing you see is you see the prey running, and at the same time you see the big cat taking after it. So how this illustration applies is, imagine a two-wheeler is that prey, or attribute a two-wheeler to be that prey, that is the wildebeest or the oryx or the deer. And we find ourselves in our four-wheeler, we feel like we are the big cat. And at that time, because we have seen that a two-wheeler, due to its natural dynamics of being able to cut through the wind and the need for a smaller road surface, it is able to overtake us and go very fast ahead of us. The first instinct is shift to the lower gear, press on the pedal of the accelerator, and try to recklessly overtake that two-wheeler, because we feel that our instinct has told us to do it. We feel justified in that moment. But come back now to the civilized aspect of things. And the civilized aspect is, we have been entrusted with a responsibility in the form of a driving license. The insurance company has given our vehicle an insurance. They entrust us to be safe on the road and not actually get into an accident and not be reckless. So the civilized approach would be, you assess the situation, you see that there is difficulty in overtaking, you see that you actually are going at a steady pace and it is not affected by the two-wheeler in front of you. And most importantly, you try to understand that your ego does not come into play. That is where you realize that the high accident rates which are seen among two-wheelers will be drastically reduced if we try to show compassion towards the two-wheeler who is essentially trying to basically make it to their daily bread, to make it to their workplace. It could perhaps be a mother who's trying to get to pick up her children on time from the kindergarten or daycare. Those are the two-wheelers which really should be the recipients of compassion from a four-wheeler. This is one of the aspects. This is not all, however. And now the need essentially amongst Goa's road traffic scenario is the need for proactive driving strategies. What are the proactive driving strategies? I've already discussed about compassion, but the most important thing here for a proactive driving strategy is anticipation. And anticipation is a facet of discipline. defensive driving, which we will see in the next slide. So, defensive driving behavior, especially defensive driving behavior, involves the following aspects. You can read it, but let me try to shed a little light. The first and foremost is that the road user, we are all road users when we step onto the road. And mind you, being a lawyer, the most important thing that the law of torts has taught me is that whenever we step onto the road surface using any kind of vehicle or even as a pedestrian, we consent to harm that may befall us. This is what the principle of law of torts says, that we consent to a mishap occurring to us on the road. But at the same time, scientifically, the benefits of stepping onto the road for the purpose of conveyance outweigh the risk. And that is why we take that step every time. Out of necessity. Sometimes on a Sunday, out of pleasure for a drive. But if we anticipate the aggressiveness of other drivers and anticipate the possibility of a road rage incident being encountered by us where we are the subject of the road rage and the person who's committing the road rage upon us, we should consider that person to be ignorant for reasons best known to him. If we go by this assumption, half of the trouble of trying to counter the road rage with our own measures of self-generated road rage in that moment can be done away with. This is the psychological aspect. Now, how can this be done? Is first and foremost is maintain a safe distance from the vehicle in front of you, as well as try to keep as much braking distance from the vehicle behind you. This involves keeping a 2-second distance from the vehicle in front of you so that you can react in time and brake in time. And also you can look into the rear view mirror or the side view mirror of your motorcycle and try to keep enough space behind you so that if you have to encounter sudden braking maneuvers, the vehicle behind you can also react similarly and in time so that they don't collide with you. But in Goa, what I've realized, and this is a phenomenon, this is a kind of affliction which transpired as vehicles became faster, and that was that if we maintain a 2-second distance from the vehicle in front of us, the common impression is that we are letting the other vehicle from the overtakers and come in front of us. There is no respect for the 2-second rule and there is certainly no acknowledgement of the 2 seconds. So what the vehicle behind you or at the side of you thinks is, this is an opening for me. I will actually now step in, take that place, and I will further reduce the reaction time between the vehicles by sticking my vehicle in. This is against lane discipline, but it is being done nonetheless, and it is being done without conscious thought. Essentially, and quite unfortunately, this practice is what I noticed when I was receiving my training at a driving school, and that was try to bridge the gap to as little as possible so that you do not invite overtaking. There was no rationale to it at that time, but we blindly followed because we were trained drivers. But now that you think about it, a conscious thought is the education that you received, the training you received from the driving school may have contributed to that factor of how we drive today on the road. and of course a sense of urgency which comes from being on the road and needing to get somewhere. So let's move on. I am sorry that I got so deep into it, but sometimes reminiscences flow and it becomes essential to convey them in the moment. So how does infrastructure and defensive driving, where's the correlation between these two things? So essentially, infrastructure, the first thing that comes to mind is the road. The road is the infrastructure. The next step after the road are the bridges. Then you have interchanges, you have bypasses, and you have even parking lots which contribute towards the infrastructure of the road. And you have, most importantly, barriers. Now you might think that a barrier is something that does not formulate a part of the road. But most of the time, the barrier is what causes the vehicles to collide, because they are seen later on. They are seen only after the vehicle is overtaken. And in that overtaking maneuver, the barrier is in the blind spot and the oncoming vehicle hits it, and there is a collision or a mishap. This is why infrastructure is in a negative correlation with defensive driving. And how do we adapt to the road conditions? Now, this is a very dynamic concept, and we need to, I will explain to you today how do we adapt to the road conditions that we encounter. We will look at a few illustrations to try to understand how the road conditions are not always going to be the same, and how we can actually mitigate them by applying a few simple principles. So, essentially it is that you need to be avoidance is the main cornerstone of defensive driving. But the principle is identify escape routes in case of certain obstacles. Now this is in regard to infrastructure and defensive driving. Then of course you have traffic laws and defensive driving. This is essential because the presence of a law, although we have in legal practice and even before jurisprudence, it is quite the maxim is quite common that which translates from Latin into ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So essentially, what it means is that road safety laws, in this context, road safety laws are present, are perhaps even well drafted. Perhaps they are well envisaged to provide an anticipation about the road use. But sometimes, or rather most of the time, the awareness of those laws is not in everybody. So that lack of awareness is where the laws aren't enough. And that is where self-discipline is the key factor. So self-discipline is that knowing what is right and doing what you think is right so as to ensure that all lives are remain intact on the road and that the aspect of safety is conserved. So in this sense, now trying to advocate for defensive driving, and this will be the beginning of it, and defensive driving helps compensate for the weak enforcement of the laws. And how do we do this? Is firstly by anticipating traffic law violations. Now, you might wonder, how can a person anticipate a traffic law violation? Well, it's simple. The first and foremost traffic law violation that you see is overspeeding. So you might actually come across a speed limit zone. While I was coming now from south of Goa towards Port Burem, I noticed that on the NH66 National Highway, at some stretches there was an 80 kilometers per hour speed limit, and then at some points, as I mounted onto the Atal Setu, it was between 50 to 60, and there were varying signboards. But if you actually try to notice the signboards, the first thing you will notice is that you have two lanes. You have one is the slow lane, that is on the left, and the law is that you always keep left. But if you want to overtake, you have to use the right hand side. This is based on the rules of the road regulations 1989. It is essentially incorporated way back in 1989. That is, the simple notion is keep left. However, you try to keep left on a two-lane road, and you don't have to anticipate it. You see it firsthand. You will witness a vehicle that is overtaking you from the right at more than 90 kilometers per hour. And that is the first traffic law violation which you will encounter on the road. Leave things like zigzagging, leave things like brake check, which you've recently seen on videos on YouTube, or even leave aspects like gesturing things to other vehicles on the road. But the first traffic law violation that we encounter is overspeeding. So how do we anticipate for this? The way defensive driving tells us to anticipate is that first and foremost is we maintain a steady speed. We essentially ensure that we have a speed limit that is very close to the documented speed limit. Look out for the signs. The only time that you will not be looking out for the signs is when you are overspeeding. So essentially, if you see a circular red board, a red line board with a white background, and you see the speed limit in that, you will see 50, 60, 70, and 80. The only time you will not notice it is when you have your foot on the accelerator. If you have the time and you have the leisure while riding, you would actually notice it. So this is where a very important aspect comes to light. And this is something that I have actually spoken to the DGP in traffic about. And that is, I stand corrected, SP traffic. SP traffic, and I said, visualize your journey before you step out. Now, what is the key to visualization is, we often think of the destination, think of where we want to be. Like I was coming here from Madram, and I thought about it, that I have point A, that is my home, and the point B is Museum of Goans. But what about the places in between? So how do I visualize them? The first thing that I need to visualize is, I am now going to cross villages and cities in order to reach this point. So I will be crossing Verna, I will be crossing Scotland, then I will be crossing the outer roads of Panjim. After that, we step into Porvorim, and then the ultimate divergence will bring us to this place. If I am not able to anticipate a number of changes in topography along my route, and I lack visualization, which is not essentially a very big deal, but trying to be a little bit more aware is always helpful in defensive driving. So let's look at it. So now, what is defensive driving? We finally get to it. Defensive driving is more than just a skill. It is a necessity. And in environments where road hazards, infrastructure failures, and weak enforcement create high-risk driving conditions, which is essentially what we all are enduring right now at the NH66 elevated corridor project between Porvorim and Giri. And I do not say this because I have filed a PIL before the Honorable High Court of Bombay. I do not say it because of that. I say it purely out of the human factor of concern for every road user when I am on the road. And the concern I have should be mutual amongst all of us. So let us try to be defensive in our driving tactics and strategize a way where we all reach home safe. So by consistently applying the following defensive techniques, which we discussed, drivers can prevent accidents, navigate unpredictable road conditions, and protect themselves as well as others in the road. So what are the strategies that I have planned, which is essentially borrowed from United Nations road safety reforms and United Nations conventions. So the strategies are fivefold. We have public safety hazards, we have structural and electrical risks, road conditions and barricading issues, environmental and dust pollution, and finally legal and regulatory non-compliance. Let us look at them one by one. So the first thing I've noticed, and I have actually taken these pictures myself, and these pertain to the ongoing infrastructure construction and development projects along the NH66 elevated corridor project. As you can probably note, this is at Porvorim. And the first thing I noticed, as I was drawing up a report of ground realities, which I later presented to the High Court in my BIS, the first things I noticed were a public safety hazard in the form of live electrical wires hanging dangerously low across the road. You can see here, this is actually a live wire. This is the barricade, the light blue thing is the barricade, this is the live wire. Then again I took another picture, the live wire is traversing different barricades. Finally, the live wire is hanging in between barricades. This is precarious. Now how I came to deduce that it is a live wire is when I finally took this picture, which if I were to zoom in, I would be able to show you that this is essentially a three-phase wire which involves earthing and one phase and one neutral. And this was it was slung so close down to the road that it could actually come in touch with any road user. So this is one of the hazards I noticed. So how do we mitigate this in defensive driving? Is, of course, before that we will look at another safety hazard because it is essentially an encapsulation of many hazards within this domain of public safety. The next thing is, I noticed that there were these electrical poles which are presumably from the previous road structure. Now you see these pillars are pertaining to an elevated corridor which is ongoing work, and the pillar is where the links for the new bridge is going to be mounted. But you can actually see this electrical pole here. This is from the previous installation, and this pole now is, even you can notice it here, is slanting towards the road surface, which means that at any time when in the upcoming monsoon, when it rains, or due to other natural causes, it can actually collapse and fall onto the road user. Sometimes it could even be fatal if this happens. And another public safety hazard which comes under the same domain is the aspect of barricades, fallen barricades obstructing traffic flow, causing lane blockages. These are basically temporary barricades, and these temporary barricades have a tendency to get displaced. Essentially because you see here, I have blurred this image on purpose because these two road users are trying to cut in between the construction project, and they are trying to, the actual opening was elsewhere, a little further. But to make it easier, they are trying to cut through, and this has essentially led to knocking down of a few temporary barricades. Not their fault, totally understandable, because they also want to get home to their respective abodes. But the idea here is that when this falls, it creates, you can see this is my car here, the green bonnet. It creates a problem for me because it reduces the lane surface area. So now we have three aspects. We have the live wire going through along the length of the project site. We have the electrical poles dangling precariously low, and finally we have the temporary barricades collapsing onto the road surface. So how would defensive driving strategy work in this? Let's look at it. So essentially, what is the defensive driving techniques that would be applicable in mitigating the public safety hazards? And now I request you all to pay a little more attention, because I not only expect you to follow this, but I expect you to also create awareness amongst all the people who you find need to know, hear this, and all other road users who come. So, the defensive driving techniques applicable here would be: first, constant scanning. Drivers must consistently scan 12 to 15 seconds ahead to anticipate potential hazards such as fallen objects or dangling devices. So if I go back, you can see here that this is close to 8 seconds ahead. I actually timed it. So from my vehicle that I'm taking, this is the bonnet, I'm taking the photograph, I can actually see close to 8 seconds ahead. But at 12 seconds mark would be when I reach the roundabout. The roundabout where the road goes, one goes towards Kalangut and one goes onward to Marks. And this is the Okokero junction, by the way. So that is the 12-15 seconds mark, depending on traffic conditions. Now essentially, I can see about 8 seconds ahead. But am I prepared to react for those 8 seconds? Am I prepared to anticipate? This is essential. Try to anticipate what you come across. So the first thing you can anticipate is that this pole may be a hazard. This barricade needs to be mitigated. So you need to prepare a tactic where you would actually evade going over this. But as you evade going over the barricade, you would swing your vehicle or your two-wheeler, you would swing it away from this barricade. That means that you would be transgressing into the next lane. And that is where the defensive driving posture of the next person gets affected. So this is something that you need to constantly scan. So the next phase, now that I've set it up, is lane positioning, because we have just spoken about how the barricades are going to transgress into lanes. So the next phase is lane positioning. That is, the safest lane position is in the middle, away from leaning poles or roadside obstacles. And you have prepared evasion, and is always have an escape route in mind, whether it's an open lane or a safe shoulder space to avoid sudden obstruction. Virtually, if you ask me, it's quite impossible. I have to admit that it is quite impossible to have an evasive route where you can stay safe. And this is where the most important aspect comes into play, is that you have to reduce your speed so as to be able to mitigate any future occurrence that may happen. These are just general guidelines. I'm sure that you all can interpret them in a much better fashion based on the presence in the moment phase. The next aspect is structural and electrical risk. So what is the hazard that I have identified here? It's an exposed trench on the roadside which can potentially create falling and collision risk. You can see here that on this aspect, you can see that this is a construction where a lot of digging has taken place, and it has formed a very deep trench. This trench was almost like 20 feet deep. And essentially, even though the contractor has, this is a JMJ hospital in that area, in Portland. Essentially here, the contractor has placed a barricade so as not to show, but a similar trench of about 10 feet has also been dug up on this side. And now you have a single lane road. On this single lane, again there is no asphalt, there is no grip. And you can see this very flimsy barricade. It is just a railing, and this railing may not even be able to absorb any impact from a vehicle. So this is what is the ground reality. And what are the defensive driving techniques that you need to apply in this scenario? First thing is, as I said earlier, slow down in unstable areas. Drivers should reduce speed while approaching areas with visible structural weaknesses to maintain better control. So essentially, we have visible structural weaknesses here. So in order to maintain better control as you mitigate this, slow down. That is the gentle advice. The next part is stay away from road shoulders. So essentially, this part on the left is the road shoulder. And this road shoulder is to be maintained as per the Indian Highway Congress guidelines. You have to maintain something called a kacha patri, which is essentially a one foot wide strip of road surface area, which allows the vehicle to duck or evade to in case of any eventuality on the main surface area of the road. But that is no longer existent in this situation. So what you have to essentially do here is stay away from the road shoulder and be in the center. We will come to that in the next part. But remain in the center of the lane and look for warning signs. Now, do you need some water? Okay. So look for warning signs. So in areas where proper barricading is inexistent or without proper barricading. So now look at the inconsistency here. You have a barricade on this side, but you do not have barricades here. The first human instinct would be to peer down as your vehicle is passing. Peer down and want to retrench them. When you do that, if I'm the driver and I'm peer down, I would instinctively tilt my steering so as to get a better view. That would mean that my vehicle is now heading towards that trench. And the next phase is my speed is fluctuating, so the person behind me does not know what's happening. So if I look for these warning signs and I actually remain on the lane and I try to avoid all these behaviors of looking down and trying to avoid the peering aspect of it, what's the word for it? Curiosity, right? I try to avoid curiosity. Then I would be focusing on the vehicle in front of me and I would try to get out of that lane as soon as I can. So look for warning signs. And what are the warning signs here is, you have a trench, you have a possibility that this could be risky, so I need to stay away and stay safe from this point of view. This is how I see. Now, structural and electrical risk, another aspect would be that loose electrical wiring is hanging, as I've already demonstrated, as the wire running through. Then you have weakly reinforced scaffolding that could collapse in high winds or under pressure. Quite recently, and quite unfortunately, a similar fatal instance occurred in Dublin, Vasco, in South Goa, where there was a 35-year-old employee of the Goa electricity department. He was traveling on his two-wheeler in the morning to report to work, and at the junction where you have the military storehouse for arms and ammunition on the way to Dublin airport, a barricade collapsed onto the two-wheeler rider, and upon that collapse, which was unannounced, the road user lost his life. A very unfortunate incident, because there was no human factor actively involved, but there was a passive negligence on the part of the contractor for not securing the barricade. So, how would defensive driving interpret and step into it is, first and foremost, slow down in unstable areas once again, where it appears structurally unsound. This is the judgmental call we all have to make at some point. reduce speed to allow better control, and look for warning signs, that is, if no barricades exist, assume the worst and navigate cautiously. The third aspect would be of defense, third defensive driving technique would be road conditions and barricading issues. We have kind of dealt with this, right? But let us look a little bit more into detail. And that is how the lanes abrupt, this is near, very close to Holy Family Church. So you have this abrupt lane narrowing without proper signage. So you see this, you see the barricade here. This barricade keeps on fluctuating in its width so as to make way for construction equipment to go in and out. And the width of the lane changes constantly. So the vehicles in front or even behind do not know how to anticipate the change in the width unless you've already gone 2 or 3 times along that. So for a first time road user, you do not know the fluctuations in the width. You assume that it is still a straight stretch and you can travel easily, but it's not the case. So, and of course you have unmarked detours. Now this is essential. As you can see here, you can see this white vehicle behind the scooter. He is taking an unmarked left turn. There is no indication of a left turn. You have barricades and other boards blocking the access to see wide enough into the turn. And you have this vehicle taking a turn even without any indicators on. So you have unmarked detours forcing last minute lane shift. Now what is that lane shift is? See this scooter here. It's on the left side. But it is forced now to take a evasive maneuver of coming onto the center of the lane. And it is because essentially this vehicle has slowed down and it is not able to enter the left turn in time, causing the scooter to evade based on the speed it is running at. So this leads to a last minute lane shift which the vehicle behind, which was me, had to anticipate. Defensive driving allowed me to anticipate this. The next part is construction debris scattered around the roadways. You can see here that you have construction debris within the site, within the barricades, and it naturally flows outside, it is deposited elsewhere. So, not only barricades but construction debris also presents a great risk and hazard. So now let's look at other aspects where defensive driving can be applied. And this is a wider picture. This gives you a better understanding of the debris here and the unmarked detour, as well as the difference in the lane width. So what is the defensive driving technique that can be applied to road conditions and barricading issues? Would be adjust your speed early. That is, drivers should spot lane merges in advance. Of course, 12 to 15 seconds is the optimal norm, but 8 seconds is good enough. And spot lane merges in advance and gradually slow down in order to avoid sudden braking. Now, follow the 3-second rule. Maintain at least 3 seconds of distance. Now, I have to admit that I was in the vehicle behind taking the photographs, and you can see that there is at least 1, 2, 3, at least a 3-second gap from the vehicle in front of me, even first on a flight in the monsoons. Sometimes a landing plane has to do a go around, and the go around is based on weather conditions. One of the weather conditions is low visibility because the pilot cannot visualize the landing strip of the runway. So this is due to thick fog in the area. This is due to too many clouds. So the lack of visualization is a problem in aviation. Why not apply the same principle on our road, on our tertiary conditions? Because see, essentially our life is as valuable in the air as it is on the road and on the ground. So by avoiding this scenario, by allowing some time for the dust to settle, we are actually able to anticipate, or we are able to see a little further. Now see, this is the very same, these two, the pictures on alternate sides of this slide are essentially the same road stretch. But as you can see here, as I waited a little bit and moved further, the dust has settled. And as the dust settles, I am able to visualize the barricades which are coming into play. So low visibility was avoided and I was able to see this. You can also do that. Of course, you should not be pressured by the vehicle behind you with a honk to say, move on, move on. But nevertheless, if you do not feel it safe, if you find that dust pollution is affecting your decision making, then do consider slowing down and do consider avoiding. Because you can see here in this creative visualization, you can see this vehicle here, the SUV on the right, is not able to see anything. And even this vehicle, even though it has on the left, even though it has its fog lamps on, the dust is actually covering its existence, its presence on the road. So this could be the unforeseen or unannounced road surprises which every day you do not take into account defensive driving techniques. Of course, then you have to use recirculated air mode. This is with regard to four-wheelers. Keep car windows closed and air circulation on recirculated mode. That is, you have the loop button on your air conditioner. Keep that on to avoid inhaling the pollutants. And use low beam headlights at night because high beams, that is in Indian lingo we call it dipper, high beams reflect dust particles and worsen the visibility, whereas low beams are safer for illumination. And finally, the last one would be legal and regulatory non-compliance. As we have seen earlier, you have to prepare or anticipate for traffic violations. One of the precursors of defensive driving. And that is poor enforcement of traffic rules leading to reckless driving, drivers making illegal U-turns, stopping suddenly or cutting lanes without warning, and unmarked intersections causing confusion and increasing collision risk. These were the hazards which are identified, and the defensive driving techniques here are crucial. And that is, do not assume other drivers will follow rules. Anticipate sudden stops, lane cuts, or wrong way driving, and be prepared to react. Preparation to react and delay in reaction are not the same thing. A delay in reaction time may not always save a life. If you delay to react, it could essentially translate into not braking on time, which means an imminent collision. But the difference here in being prepared to react is you are prepared to react at the right time. So you are waiting to brake at the right time. But you also know that if you brake abruptly, even though you see the vehicle in front of you is very close by, if you brake too soon, you would startle the road user behind you. So that is where the preparation comes into play. Be prepared by looking into the rear view mirror and trying to understand that how I can balance both vehicles so as not to touch the bumper of either one. Then of course be cautious at unmarked intersections. Look left, right, or whatever suits right, left, right, before crossing any intersection without clear traffic signals. And we have seen this in the previous slide where the vehicle was doing an unmarked left turn at a detour. And anticipate lane cutting and overtaking. Lane cutting is where aggressive driving behaviors such as road rage are given nascence to, they are born. Essentially, someone tries to overtake me in an abrupt and haphazard manner. I feel a sense of rage overcome me, and the first and foremost reaction I have is I consider that my vehicle has speed, momentum, power, and a gearbox. Put the clutch, depress the clutch, put the lower gear and try to match the speed of the lane cutting vehicle so as to block it. A common instinct and a common occurrence in every Goan road. But imagine if the person who, if I assume the compassion necessary in order to let that lane cutting two-wheeler or even four-wheeler go on. Let him have his victory. For perhaps his own anxiety, her own anxiety, perhaps wanting to get home early. We are all strangers on an anonymous road stretch. But imagine trying to place ourselves in the shoes of that speeding vehicle and trying to let it go. Because if it has not harmed you, if it has not grazed your vehicle, if it has not led to any collision, but if you have only been rattled by the whole experience of lane cutting and a quick overtaking, imagine letting go and imagine how much more time it gives you to react to the next instance. You can take a deep breath, you can cool down, you can visualize the road ahead, and most importantly, you can evaluate what's the most important thing in your life. That would be essentially your family. So try to get home to your family rather than fall into these minor squabbles on the road. Anticipate them. That is where defensive driving will truly bloom into a technique that can save lives. So additional considerations here would be protecting vulnerable road users. Now, we have dealt with vehicles that are powered, but what about the pedestrians? And those are the vulnerable road users. And of course, these bikers are not motorcycle users, these are pedal bikes, essentially the ones, human powered bikes. So, give extra space to pedestrians and bikers. Then slow down their crossings and residential areas. Did you know that there is a separate speed limit in the residential zone? Some residential zones which have a wide road, it's under 40, but near the school zone it's 5. Near the suburbs, near the crossings at the suburbs, it is 20. And at some places, near hospitals and courts, it's about 10. But we rarely follow this because we are still busy trying to overtake or give back the road rage which we have just faced. So if you disregard and expect sudden movements from cyclists and pedestrians. This is essential because as opposed to cars and bikes, motorcycles, they do not have side view indicators. They do not have the yellow indicators on the left or right. So they are not able to indicate. Of course, some advanced cyclists do that. They have indicators. But if you have a BSA bike of a daily wage worker going on the road, then he may use a hand signal, but he may just try to wing it in the direction of where he wants to go. This is something we need to anticipate. And this essentially happens in urbanized areas, mainly. But it can even happen in rural areas. So creating a defensive driving culture, what does it involve? First and foremost is inculcation, and that is schools should teach defensive driving basics. Then, just as I said, charity begins at home. Defensive driving education should begin at some institution which is in the formative phases of our life. Next is public awareness campaigns on anticipating road hazards. Of course, I have to admit that this crept into my presentation as a very by the way thing. But public awareness, if it is not focused, is not going to be useful. So always and most importantly, build your focus group, build your target audience, and only then will the awareness campaign actually have effect. So I could come here and speak to you about all the idealisms, but if I had not to give you the examples, then the public awareness campaign would almost be ineffective. But I hope that through the real world examples, I am able to integrate how the technique should be applied. So that's where public awareness should have a target audience, and licensing should focus on situational awareness. So now, where is this coming into place? The RTO officer who is essentially going to interview us before issuing issuing the driving license, he should test not only our knowledge of the rules, of the indicators, or of the or take us for a driving test and see how we perform, but they should put hypothetical scenarios, test us with hypothetical scenarios, which ask us how would we react to it, and if there is an indication that we are able to act defensively in certain scenarios, only then should a license be issued. Of course, you might think of this as restrictive, but this is something, if well integrated, it will work. For the simple reason that there's a very nice quote which says that things do not get easier. Life does not get easier. You just become better at it. So in the same way, if you start with the difficult things first, on the road you're going to see the refinement. So let it start at the beginning. It will be a little difficult to adapt, but in the end, the precision will be evident on the roads and stadium. And my final thoughts on defensive driving, and I also am aware that attention spans are not going to be as long as my presentation, so I apologize for being a little specific in certain instances, but it was essential. So defensive driving isn't just a skill, it is a survival necessity. Take this example. And each driver plays a role in road safety, that is, we all. And this, I would like to tweak this a little bit, that it's not only each driver, but it is essentially each road user. So let us not only look at a driver of a vehicle, let us look at a rider of a motorcycle, let us look at a cyclist of a bicycle, and let us even look at a road user who chooses not a pedestrian. Now, how would a pedestrian play a role in road safety? He or she or even a child would not attempt or endeavor to cross a road, two-way road, without going at a designated pedestrian crossing area. Of course, it's very easy to just cross at an unmarked road without barricades. But the risk involved is not only that you are going to be hit by a moving vehicle, but you would also essentially cause a chain reaction of many vehicles reacting as the one vehicle which tried to save you swerves. You'll be causing many fatalities or many casualties. So the responsibility is an interplay on every road, not with the driver. And the safer we drive, the safer our society becomes. Now, this is akin to the idea of vaccination. That is, if you vaccinate a population, then the interaction of the non-vaccinated population would be much better, in the sense that the immunity standards would be much better. A scientific argument, but the same way, if certain population is made aware or immunized about defensive driving against road safety risk with the vaccine of defensive driving, then the interaction with the larger population who does not practice defensive driving, the interaction will be much more safer and fruitful. And lastly, I would like to conclude by reiterating that smooth roads and sharp societies would begin at prison of road. Thank you very much for that. Now, I would like to call upon the audience. To just a few brief seconds, just to share, if they would like to, a few instances where they felt road safety was threatened, their integrity on the road as a human being was challenged. Any instance, please share, and then let's try to evaluate it, and let's try to analyze it and try to make more, assimilate, and try to understand how it could have been done in this manner. So anybody, the floor is yours, please take it.
So, My name is Yash. I've come from Engine. A lot of times I've seen people honking behind us, making me rush through the traffic. So at a junction, I feel threatened in that way. So I try to control myself. I don't pay attention to the honking, but I just ignore the honking. I just think about the safety of everyone else on the road.
So yes, just one more thing. The honking would essentially be when the vehicles are stationary.
So when I'm waiting at the junction, letting the cars pass, the person behind me is just thinks that I'm stopping him. I'm blocking his car. So he keeps honking. He doesn't look at what is in front of me, or he's not thinking of why I have stopped. So that's what I'm reacting to.
So essentially, you are following the road discipline of stopping at the junction before entering the junction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you feel threatened by the honking, or you feel a sense of rage or indifference towards the vehicle behind you who's honking.
So it's I'm threatened by the honking because it's creating a chaos. It's creating.
At that time, are you able to personify the person who's doing it to you? By looking into your rear view mirror, do you personify the rage?
I can think of him as somebody aggressive. He's just trying to get to wherever he wants to get to.
But now let's look at it on a technical aspect. Essentially, the horn is a high decibel noise, high pitched, high decibel noise, which is being used to compel Yash to move his vehicle and to give the other vehicle right of way. But the right of way or the precedence of right of way right now belongs to Yash, because he is the first person at that intersection, and he has the right to enter the intersection and move into his respective exit so that he can reach his destination. If Yash chooses to react, the first thing he will do is an aggressive iteration of Yash would be that he would try to wait stationary and not react at all, even when the instance was there to enter. This would be the first thing. This would be indifference. The next aspect would be that he would try to give the impression that is moving, make the other person put in the gear and apply the accelerator. Then he would do a sudden emergency brake, causing the person behind him to stutter, which the aggressive iteration of Yash would feel that he is actually giving payback to the guy behind him for control. But I'll tell you what I sense that Yash is capable of is he's capable of following road safety norms, and he's capable of understanding that his duty is not towards the honking person, it is towards the people who are already in the junction, and the people who are trying to go their respective destinations. I'm sure that since every vehicle is forward looking, Yash's first reaction would be, I do not want to harm the vehicles in front of me or collide with them, because they are not facing the stimulus I am facing. So I will actually be courteous, and I will let the intersection allow me the natural space and time to enter it. So notwithstanding this, we appreciate you for taking the time to not react and give in to the compulsion to swiftly and without announcement enter the road junction. But at the same time, the practice of the person behind him is very threatening, and it is very, very aggressive, no doubt. But we need to understand one thing. There are two instances where it is justified, and that is quite commonly seen when you have an ambulance or an emergency vehicle such as a fire engine behind you. And if they are honking, you better make it a point to let them pass, because sometimes in an ambulance, those few seconds would cost a person their life in not reaching the ER on time. And secondly, if it's a fire service vehicle, then the law is that you have to actually make space for the vehicle to pass. And that compliance involves that you actually try to go as much to the side as practically possible and let the vehicle pass. So first and foremost, is scan your rear view mirror and try to understand if it is an emergency vehicle If it is, then you have to comply. Otherwise, you have to follow defensive driving, and you have to understand that the vehicle behind you is honking just as a prompt. So try to imagine it as a prompt to say go ahead, and try to imagine it as multiple prompts, but do not attribute aggressiveness to this. Because the moment you attribute aggressiveness, your instinct would react and say, I actually have to do something about it, I have to address it. So still look forward. So we appreciate you sharing, Yash, but it is good enough. And what I would suggest is keep being defensive. Thank you.
Can we use the hazard light in this scenario?
Yes, you can use the hazard light, but the hazard light has to be used sparingly, because the hazard light indicates that there is something wrong, some kind of breakdown, some kind of untoward incident in front of you. But to use a hazard light, you have to first face a collision. The normal instances, you have to face a collision. You have to face a road surface area caving in or collapsing. You have to face construction issues such as a barricade falling on the road, or you have to face an accident for that matter. But to use a hazard light momentarily, just to indicate to the person behind you that you are actually facing a hazardous condition due to their prompting, would be justified, but keeping it on constantly would not be justified. So it is just as an indicator. Yes. Because essentially the conditions are still normal. You are at a junction, the honking is there, but essentially the junction in front of you is functioning well. So there is no hazard that is actually occurring at the junction. The hazard is behind. So you try not to be the contributing factor. So you have to now apply the defensive approach of how am I going to not only indicate to the person behind me that he's being, he's causing greater risk not only to me but to the junction users in front of me. Use the hazard 1 or 2 times, that is justified. But at the same time, try to avoid using it constantly so as to ensure that you are not giving a wrong impression to the other people who are entering the junction or the intersection. So momentarily is fine, but there is it has to be used judiciously. Anybody else?
Thank you. Mass transportation. I mean, all this is because of personalized transport we are using.
Yes.
So the only solution I think is mass transportation, and people work close to their residential areas, so they don't have to move long distances.
Well, the pandemic has taught us 2 different things. So I will be a little contradictory here. First and foremost is, it would be really nice to see mass transportation, and the endeavor of the Kadamba Transport Corporation, KTC, to integrate smaller and more agile electrical buses into the smaller routes covering intercity travel is commendable. But at the same time, the practicality of mass transit is based on last mile connectivity. And what is last mile connectivity is, you can take a bus or you can take the shuttle from Margao to Panjim, Panjim to Mamsa, you can take the shuttle. Comfortable, convenient, and there are no stops in between. But is that your last mile? Would that get you home?
Yeah, that's important. I agree to that. That's the most important actually.
So the last mile connectivity.
So that you discourage personalized transport.
Yes, the last mile connectivity is where you need a shuttle bus to connect to a hub which gives you the last mile connectivity access. That is what will make it more appealing.
We have the buses.
You have the buses.
The problem is we don't have the frequency and the discipline of timing like we have in Bombay.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah. Otherwise, nobody will want to use their personal vehicles. We will be using either the last mile transport. We'll be coming here to know by the last mile transport.
Well, in that case, Mo could also have given us the impetus of saying, I'm sending a bus, you all get on the Mo bus.
Yeah, that's the one solution.
But that is, but see, now try to understand this. This behavior has been inculcated in us quite recently, because during the pandemic, there was a statistic posted in the newspapers that when the lockdowns were announced initially, the demand for private vehicles increased manifold. And why was this? Was because people were afraid of risking themselves to infection, COVID-19 infection. So, from another important factor is that in Goa, the affordability of vehicles is based on the personal financial capacity of people. So, everybody actually prefers to have their own vehicle, and this is not only four-wheelers, it's all two-wheelers. So, the essential aspect which we are getting at right now is can we now shed our financial status or our financial ego and get on the mass transit? This would take some doing, and this is where civic social sense comes into play, is that we denounce ourselves and put ourselves behind the essentially a vehicle has emissions, essentially a vehicle is occupying more space on the road. It is even burning a hole in your own personal budget. So essentially, if we can denounce ourselves and try to give in to collaborative consumption approach, there's a very good chance.
Yeah, but worldwide we are going for mass transportation, whereas in Goa or India we are going for more private building, flyover.
As we were speaking, me and Aved, before the start of the session, we spoke about a very interesting topic. He brought up mass transportation, and I thought to myself, and he even agreed with me, was that instead of building the bridge and a bridge over land, if we could have actually had similar to Bombay, similar to Mumbai,
Metro.
we have the metro, we have the sky bus. If we could have a project of rail metro MRT similar to Singapore, if we could have that constructed in between cities, how nice wouldn't have it been? Because it would improve tourism, it would reduce emissions, and it would make transport cheaper.
And you avoid cutting trees. Metro could have been underground. Metro could have been underground.
No, we are not ready for underground yet. But trees could have definitely been saved and can be saved even now thanks to our efforts.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Moses, for your time and understanding. I request Dr. to give you a small token of appreciation.
Let's give a big hand to.
Yes, they will the whole area for the exhibition. You can informally, people can talk to you.